Good afternoon from the HS Visio stage, live at Nordic Business Forum 2022. Hello to those of you watching us once again online, and to all of you here in the audience. Great to have so many people joining us. And what a day we've had so far. Day two already well underway. We've had conversations about branding, bureaucracy, the metaverse, and on the main stage, how exciting to get a sneak preview of some of the guests that will be joining us in 2023. We'd love to hear what you think about them and what you think of this year's program so far. Please use the hashtag nbforum 2022 for that. It's always great to get your input, and you'll be getting a feedback questionnaire a little bit later on as you leave the venue. Now, we're going to be talking geopolitics with our next couple of guests. As we all know, it's been a roller coaster few years with the pandemic. Now we're handling the impacts of the war in Ukraine, a looming global recession. So what does all of this mean for business leaders and for our wallets? Well, first up, we can welcome fresh from the main stage, a best-selling author, historian, and philosopher, Yuval Noah Harari. Thank you so much for joining us once again.
Thank you.
We heard you on the main stage talking a lot about the future of work. And I'm sure there'll be a few more questions on that from the audience. But we're going to shift our focus a little bit to geopolitics, these very turbulent times that we're living in, or that we feel we're living in. From a historical perspective, how turbulent are they?
Very turbulent. It feels like we fell off the edge of the cliff, especially given that, the last 2-3 decades have been the most peaceful era, or one of the most peaceful eras in human history. And this is now over. We are in an increasingly turbulent world. And the problem is that we are facing these major challenges that just cannot be solved without global cooperation.
Okay, thank you for that perspective. We've had some real optimists here, and you said on stage you're neither an optimist or a pessimist. You're trying to look at this from a broader perspective. You wrote in The Economist at the start of the Ukraine crisis that the direction of human history was at stake.
Yes.
Now that 6 months have passed, how do you reflect on that time?
The direction is not good.
I mean, I'm not saying it's got any better, but, how are you reflecting?
Again, the basic question, it goes much beyond the specific regional war. I mean, how are we going to tackle climate change? How are we going to regulate AI if we do not have global cooperation? And global cooperation is disintegrating. What we are seeing is a dramatic rise, for instance, in defense budgets all over the world. For most of history, the military was the #1 item on the budget of every king and emperor and sultan. In recent decades, the average expenditure of governments all over the world on their military was about 6% of the budget. That's nothing in historical terms. This is what enabled countries to shift resources, to build healthcare systems, education systems, and now as defense budgets again skyrocket.
Yeah. Especially here in the Nordics, where there hasn't been any need for military action for a very, very long time. Is there a key moment in history that you think world leaders could learn from right now?
History never repeats itself. So it's not like, we can do the same thing we did last time. No, it just doesn't work like that. It's always something new. But part of the issue is that as a historian, I'm kind of aghast at the way that world leaders, like Putin, for instance, often use history as a justification for what they do. They live in a fantasy about the past, like that Russia is threatened by Europe. They live it as if it's 1941 or as if it's Napoleon's time. And nobody in Europe wanted to invade Russia. For all the people who kind of make excuses for the Putin regime, there is a simple question. Which country in 2022 was about to invade Russia? Nobody. So these kind of historical analogies can be extremely dangerous because we don't live in 1941.
Yeah, 2022. Lots of questions coming in about the future from our audience. This one says, Yuval, what are the best kind of politics to help us adapt to the future? Is it a free market to incentivize change, or UBI to care for people who are slow to adapt?
UBI I am not in favor of, because the very meaning of the term is problematic. People talk about universal basic income when they actually mean national basic income. What automation will do, it will create immense gaps in the international system, in the global economy. Some countries will benefit enormously. Some countries could completely collapse. Now, if you think UBI means that you tax corporations in California in order to pay a basic income to unemployed people in Pennsylvania, that can work. But who will support the people in Guatemala? Who will support the people in Pakistan? I'm not seeing a US government or a Finnish government taxing its people, its corporations, in order to support the people there. And this is where the big problems will be. So again, we need to think about this in global terms, not in national terms, and I don't see any kind of global basic income coming along.
This user says, how do you see diversity? Do you think more diverse competencies could be useful, or are we seeing the drain of diversity on a group level?
I think that because the future is so unexpected, that the pace of change is just accelerating, diversity is essentially good for businesses, because to have diverse types of peoples and backgrounds and skills is absolutely essential. You just don't know what's the next big thing that's coming even in your field. So again, this trying to extrapolate from the past, this is what worked in the last 10 years. So we need these kinds of skills, these kinds of people. This is bound to fail.
Yeah, it's all about forward thinking. This question from Philippe fits into that. How could we perhaps change our education systems to equip our children for the 2050 world, they're saying? Well, can we do that, or do we need to start planning that in 2049?
Too late. I mean, again, you need to start now. The education system is the front line. You know, businesses, they can wait to 2040, 2045. Education can't. If you now teach something irrelevant, you can't go back in time and change it. So again, the focus should be on not learning specific skills, but on how to keep learning and changing, which demands a lot of mental flexibility. If you think, for instance, about information, so I'll focus on history, this is my field. No point teaching people in school specific information like dates and names and things like that. They can Google it. What they really need is the ability to tell the difference between a reliable source about history and an unreliable source. This is key, not just for understanding history, but also for our politics. Because our politics is all based on historical narratives. And if people can't tell the difference between reliable historical narratives and false historical narratives, we are in big trouble.
Although with the advent of fake news and AI, recognizing reliable sources is going to be harder than ever.
This is why it's so important, again, to dedicate time in school to teaching people about these dangers and giving them the skills to how do you tell, if somebody comes and tells you something, I don't know, about the Second World War, how do you know whether to trust it or not? How do you go and actively collect new information in order to judge between these two claims? This is much more important than knowing specific facts.
Speaking of which, you are actually working on, you've released a children's book. It's coming out in a lot of different places this autumn. Tell us about that and why you decided to focus on that market rather than the adult market as you have done in your previous books.
Because, you know, children need to understand the world just like anybody else, even more than other people. What I see in many countries is that the education system is focusing on teaching mainly the history of our people, our nation, our culture, which is important, but which is just not enough. Not enough to understand the world in which we live. Not enough to understand yourself. You know, everything from, I don't know, you like football? Football was not invented either by the Finnish or by the Israelis. It was invented by the English. If you like sugar, sugar came from New Guinea. And if you look much deeper in yourself, like our fears, our love, where did it come from? Not from any specific human culture. It comes from millions of years of evolution. If you wake up as a child in the middle of the night, afraid that there is a monster under the bed, this is not coming from Finnish or Jewish culture. This is actually a memory from millions of years ago when there were actually monsters that ate children in the dark. If a lion came to eat you and you kept sleeping, you did not survive. So to understand, again, the most basic things about us, who we are, our fears, our emotions, we need a global understanding of history that goes all the way back to human evolution.
Yeah. Fascinating. I'm looking forward to having a look at that and buying that for some of the young children in my world. This post comes from an anonymous user, but thank you. They say, how long do you expect the current time of turbulence to continue before we reach a new balance?
I don't think there'll be a new balance.
I was worried you were going to say that.
I think that, as I said, we fell off the cliff. That people, during the corona, there was this constant yearning, when will this be over and we'll be back to normal? And now the impression is we'll never be back to normal. I mean, it's going, the pace of change and also the pace of the crisis is just going to increase. And this is, and psychologically, it's very difficult, especially for people, say, in our age group, because we had the fortune, most of us, to live in a very extraordinary time in history, in the most peaceful, relatively peaceful. There were still some wars. I come from the Middle East, you don't need to tell me. There were also wars in the early 2000s, but generally it was the most peaceful era in human history, and we kind of got used to it. And unfortunately, now it seems that, we build these, peace did not come from the sky, it came from institutions that humanity built. We now neglected these institutions, and the neglect didn't start in Moscow. The neglect started in Washington, in London, the very countries that built the international institutions that created this relatively peaceful and prosperous era. They turned their backs on it. And this is what we get.
Moving away from politics, obviously we're in a room full of a lot of business leaders. You talked on the main stage about don't just give to charity, actually kind of try and reshape your business.
No, I'm not going for don't give to charity, but focus on...
Don't do that and think that's enough.
Yes, it's not a compensation. It's not like you're doing this awful thing in your business, but then you say, well, I give to charity, so it's fine. No, forget about charity. Focus on your core business. Have a business model that has a good impact on society, and this is your contribution.
Yeah, we've had one question saying, what do you think about what the founder of Patagonia has done recently, announcing that Earth will be their only shareholder? Basically, the owner's given away a lot of the business and said that the money is going to go back into impactful projects.
I'm more concerned about where the money is coming from than about where it's going. Again, if you make lots of money in a bad way and then you give it to good causes, this is not good. I mean, the biggest impact of a business is always in how it makes its money, not in how or where it contributes its money. So I spoke, for instance, a lot about the broken information system we have. The high-tech companies which built this information system, if they destroy the foundations of democracy and then give billions to charity, the bottom line is still very, very negative.
Yeah. Listen, so much for all of us to think about. Thank you for those brilliant reflections. Yuval Noah Harari, let's give another big round of applause. Thank you so much from everyone at Nordic Business Forum.
Thanks.
We're getting some new guests into place now for you. We've got Mika Altala, Director of the Research Institute at the Finnish Institute of International Affairs, based here in Helsinki, an authority on defense and NATO, so picking up on some of those themes that we were talking about just then with Yuval Noah Harari. And we've also got a very special guest getting ready behind the scenes backstage as well. You saw him earlier on stage, many of you. Garry Kasparov, chess champion and political activist from Russia. And so they are making their way to the stage now. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here. Please take a seat and make yourself feel comfortable. And as always, please do get your questions coming in. It's been brilliant to see how engaged everyone's been doing and making my job a lot easier with some fantastic questions coming in. Mika, let's start with you. We've been talking a lot about Ukraine. Obviously, this has been a very important few months for Finland, bordering Russia, deciding to join NATO. What's working life been like for you?
Well, it has been extremely busy. I didn't plan this, and difficult to plan wars. For Putin, it has been easier, but for Finland, the kind of the awakening to the world where power politics prevails and our neighbor starts a war in the neighborhood. Of course, the Finnish nation has been extremely alert, and that has taken me to different media outlets and television studios quite often. It has been somewhat hectic. I also had a firstborn son this April, so one needs to arrange things very carefully beforehand.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that and for managing to provide a voice of expertise during this, very turbulent time. Gary, you've been a very vocal critic of President Putin for some time. What kind of reaction are you getting when you travel the world and share your stories?
I have to say that response to my message has changed after February 24th. I could even judge it by my appearance here 7 years ago at Nordic Business Forum in 2015 and today. In general, the conferences I attend, the media I speak to, is now paying serious attention to all my words. When my book Winter is Coming was released in 2015, it was met with a lot of skepticism.
Yeah.
People thought, okay, it's this, even if we consider Putin being a bad guy, it's about business, nobody's going to throw this such a lucrative business for some imperialist ambitions. They were wrong, because dictators' metrics of success are very different from ours. And now the same corporations that were very cautious in inviting me because I was some kind of radioactive for their business in Russia, now they just, they offer me, speaking engagements almost every day a week. Not that I'm happy about it, because it's happening at the cost of tragedy in Ukraine, but I hope it's not too late for us to understand the true nature of Putin regime. And it goes beyond Russia and Ukraine. It's, as I mentioned in my presentation today, it will have effect throughout the world, from Venezuela to Taiwan. So any success for Putin means, more oppression and more tragedies for free-minded people. And Ukrainian victory will be a sign of liberation from the world, from the fetters of dictatorship.
Well, thanks for sharing those perspectives. Obviously, there will be a very different perspective from some of Putin's fans. Gary, sorry, I'm just going to move on to Mika, actually. So how much of a public issue has it been here in Sweden, here in Finland, and also with Sweden joining NATO as well? Do you get a sense that people are sort of worried? Is this a sort of sitting around the table topic? Or how sort of everyday Finns taken the upcoming NATO membership and what's going on?
Well, I think it is a constant source of worry. Russia has always been historically the main ontological source of worry for Finns. You only need to look to the Finnish history that has periods of time called the long hate, the old hate, great hate, little hate, in order to appreciate what has been the Finnish historical experience. So right now we are worrying about Russia. What does it mean on the long run, what it is doing, and how it can affect also Finland? We can see the tail of war already in the interest rates, in inflation numbers, in energy prices. Clearly, a large-scale war to the south of Finland is not a small matter. So then the question becomes, how do we see the future? Do we take kind of a minimalistic understanding of Russian moves as something that specifically influences only Ukraine? Or do we have more maximalist understanding of Putin's aims, that it is a general hatred towards the West and what West represents? And that also includes Finland. So question is, to what possible position along that corridor you put your bet on. We have to worry about the maximalist goals. But the minimalism, of course, is what prevails today.
Yeah, people are worried about the day-to-day, they're worried about their livelihoods and businesses, but there is this bigger, holistic picture. This question to both of you comes in from one of the viewers. Mika and Gary, what do you think went wrong in the 90s, and how can the West make sure we support Russia better if regime change happens?
I think we have to recognize that after the end of the Cold War and a triumph of the free world, nothing was done to offer a new vision. Because it's all about, just creating structures that will be adequate to the challenges. And we know in history that when we had inadequate political structures and they failed, we paid enormous price. For instance, after World War I, there was a League of Nations. But it was lifeless because America didn't join and Europe also didn't have a clear vision, so how to actually handle it. And there was the revanchist Germany on the rise. And obviously, let's not forget, Japan actually, that's where the war started in 1931, so the World War II, in the whole cycle. So United Nations that was created in 1945 was built to freeze conflicts, to avoid another war. This time between the United States and Soviet Union and the respective blocs. But in 1991, we had to look for other solutions, not for freezing conflicts, but for solving problems. And also, we had to recognize the fact that the true nature of the threat coming from Russia was its imperial virus rather than communism. Communism was more like the wrapping paper.
The wrapper, yeah.
But the package was the imperial nature, the aggressive nature of the Russian state that survived over centuries. And the Soviet Union was another reincarnation of this threat. And we just, okay, I say we, probably it's wrong because I was still on the Russian side. So but though even we didn't understand that, that's things like, the war in Chechnya, started by Yeltsin in 1994 to raise his popularity. And then the Second Chechen War started already by, at the end of Yeltsin's rule, to promote Putin. Those things, were indications that Russia was not on the right track. And there was no alternative vision. And if you offer no alternative, then you create vacuum. And the vacuum will be filled. And who filled the vacuum? Russia, China, religious extremism. So it's time now for us to understand what is the future world we want to live it. Again, learning from all these lessons, the 30 years, not just from Ukraine, but also from other tragedies, like in Syria, like in Afghanistan. So, and I think it's time for the free world to actually come up with something much better than simple United Nations, where dictators can brag about their successes, paying lip services for human rights, but to come up with some sort of League of Democracies. Because free world still enjoys enormous advantages in economy, in military, in politically, even morally. And we have to start, playing our strong cards. But again, it's about strategy.
Yeah.
And so far, we don't have the statesmanship of the caliber of Roosevelt, Churchill, De Gaulle, Adenauer, and we are dealing mostly with the managers. They're trying to deal with the existing problems today rather than making bets for the future.
Let's bring in Mika. What do you think about that? I mean, some strong critique of the UN, which I think, a lot of people would say does some great work around the world, and criticism of the modern day leaders, perhaps not great statesmen like in the past, or women.
Certain key promises have been broken. One key promise was never again after the Second World War. It had two parts. Never again we are going to witness genocidal wars in Europe. And then that we should tame the excesses of nationalism, and that entails taming fascism. And you can clearly see how fascism works in Russia today. It is a quasi-fascistic state, very excessive in its patriotism and nationalism. Mother Russia now is something that wallet used to be when Putin first started. The weight of your wallet was the promise that Putin gave that it is going to increase. Now it is the weight of Mother Russia and the size of it. Although Russia is one of the biggest by land area states in the world, the biggest one, still there's a feeling of being left out, and this dark soil of Russia needs to expand, and we can see the results of that in Ukraine. It has also the genocidal side. This morning when Putin was giving the speech, he was talking about the non-existing Ukraine, that there is no Ukraine, it's part of Russia. And the heart of Russia somehow is in eastern Ukraine, and Russia cannot survive without the heart. And this is fascism, as we knew it. And those broken promises, they should be fixed, and the global governance system right now cannot cope with those. I agree with Gary that we don't have anything that can stop Russia in UN right now.
In the much shorter term, we have this question of what do you think about Finland continuing to let Russian tourists to travel to Finland and through Finland? Should that be up there with sanctions?
Well, I think the events are now annulling our debate on the visa issue. Clearly, we have to take distance from Russia. We have to secure our own borders. There has to be some humanitarian route to Finland, but we cannot continue as normal in case of tourism, for example. It cannot be an exception. It cannot be an area of interaction that is totally outside of war that is happening. We have to be aware that Russia has been using tourism to carry out special operations, for example in UK, when the nerve agent was applied there. That was the tourism route. So we have to be aware of the security issues involving this, and those are going to be increasing in the future.
I mean, skeptics might argue, well, it's giving them a chance to travel. It's giving a chance for money to come into the economy.
I'm sorry, it's absolute nonsense. This is, as a Russian, I can say, it's absolute nonsense. It's a wartime. You don't cross front lines back and forth. There was no German tourism in 1941 to London. I, as a representative of the Russian Action Committee, we argue that if somebody wants to leave Russia and to cut ties with Putin regime, they should be welcome. But they have to sign a declaration that will recognize Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. They will recognize the war as criminal and regime as illegitimate. You're welcome. But tourism, absolutely not. It's war. So everybody who is staying on the other side of this front line must feel the heat of the war. So now Putin announced mobilization. If you want to leave Russia and you don't want to serve in Putin's army, yes, that's fine. But that's another story. That's a humanitarian cause. But simple tourism, it's really bad idea also because it creates a hole in the technological blockade. Finland has been used alongside with Turkey or Republic of Georgia as a window to smuggle the spare parts that are so needed for Russian rockets that are killing Ukrainian civilians. So that's why, again, just stop, talking about, this moral sufferings of those who cannot visit Europe on shopping tours.
Thank you. So valuable to get both of your perspectives. There are applause already started there. Gary Kasparov and Mika Aaltola, thank you so much for joining us here at Nordic Business Forum. And great to get so many questions in from the audience. I'm sorry we haven't had a chance to get through all of them, but we are reading them all, and it's really valuable to get all of your perspectives. Okay, from political changes to leading change in business. That's what our last guest in this round of live stream interviews is going to be focused on. Hello to Zoe Chance, another keynote speaker who was on the main stage a little bit earlier, senior lecturer at Yale School of Management in the US. Thank you so much for joining us here. So, very much flipping direction a little bit based from our last talk, but on stage, you were talking a lot about the power of individuals to influence change, and now in this next segment, we're going to be talking about changing common goals as a team, teamwork. There's a lot of people who visited this conference together with their team. We've heard a lot about how there is a need to have a good culture in your workforce. How can managers best lead change within teams, Zoe?
How can they what?
How can managers best lead change within their teams? There's a lot of leaders here.
Yes. The role of a manager is to influence other people, and the role of a leader is to empower others to be influential, the way that I see it. So a successful team leader and the leader of an engaged team is one who doesn't have to do a great deal on a day-to-day business basis for that team to be functioning. And if you don't know what it takes for your team to do that, if you're at the VIP session, you heard me teaching the magic question, and if you weren't, I'll just give you the quickie version. Ask, whenever you don't know, what would it take? The magic question, what would it take? This is the most influential question you can ask.
Thank you. What examples have you got that you could share for us from managers or companies you've observed where there was a resistant workforce and they managed to get on board with big change?
It's hard for leaders and managers, I know, especially right now, to be getting people on board with big changes because employees have seen changes that they didn't anticipate and didn't want over the past few years. And this is the time when the workforces that continue to be engaged, happy to come to work, are those who were being treated well and treated with respect before all of this craziness happened. So, the time to start was yesterday. The time to be reaping the benefits of that work that you've been putting in already is today. And if you haven't been doing the investments, but I think you have because you're here, but now would be the time to start.
Yeah, definitely. A lot of people here very open to change, and we've been talking a lot about how there is a need to be flexible and dynamic. Earlier on stage, you talked a lot about personal influence, and I wanted to ask, what is your favorite personal success story when it comes to influencing change, either in your work life or socially?
I don't know if this is my favorite ever, but my favorite one from the past few months was related to the invasion of Ukraine. And it was when this happened in February. I was really busy with a book launch. I had just published a book on February 1st, but I was just really, really upset, as many of you have been and still are. And what I decided to do was use the power of framing, which is one of the topics that I write about in the book. And I took a weekend, and my assistant and I reached out on Twitter to all of these journalists and all of these media organizations that were covering this situation and using frames like conflict or situation. And we reached out to them to say, thank you so much for covering this. We know that you care. We care too. But would you consider what it says to people when you use the frame of conflict? It sounds like something your parents might have. There's no good one, bad one. You could sit back and just watch it happen. And we asked them to please consider using the frame invasion or war to give the real attention that this deserved. And we had just over the course of a weekend, we had 30 different journalists and news outlets responding personally to us saying, thank you so much for that reframe, and we're going to write about it differently now. I'm not saying I'm the person who shifted, oh, thank you. I'm not saying I'm the person who shifted the frame, but there were many people like me, including journalists at Euromaidan Press in Ukraine, who were doing similar work. And this is the kind of power that you can have regardless of the structural power that you have in your organization.
And I think there has been much tougher language. I've observed that as a media consumer of different media globally. Let's talk about a bit more of the business context, the day-to-day. You've talked about the importance of saying no, which is something that I know a lot of us struggle to do. But so how do we fight back against people if they're trying to influence us, but we really don't want to do something?
As nice people, many of us have been trained to be indirect when we say no. And there are clear cultural differences here too, right? And cultural differences come into conflict when we have direct cultures working in global teams or doing global business with indirect cultures. And all of us who have that habit of being indirect need to be willing to be a little more direct than we have been. If, on the other hand, we're from a culture or just our personality background is to be hard driving and direct, and we've gotten feedback that it's a little bit too much, we need to start with more gentle and end with more direct. So all of us can be gentle to start, all of us can be direct afterward, but being as clear as no thank you thank you for asking. Absolutely no. And you can be warm while being direct. Those two things are not in conflict.
Yeah, we had some really interesting speakers talking about cross-cultural communication yesterday as well, actually, and even mapping where different members of your teams come from to try and help you get the nuance right. More generally, some of your research focuses on simple ways to help people lead richer, healthier, and happier lives. Now, here in the Nordics, there's always a lot of talk about how this is a place that tops surveys for well-being. Finland always does really well on the happiness index. Is that something that's visible to you as when you visit the Nordics, or is it anything you've reflected on during this stay?
Something that I've been reflecting on is how it seems to me like people here lead fuller, more human lives than some of the business leaders back in my country in the United States, where people are telling me or putting on social media, here's my regular job, I'm a CEO, but I also sing in a death metal band. Or here's my regular job, I run a marketing agency, but I also write books about sharks. I don't see so much of that with business leaders in the United States, and it makes me want to spend a lot more time here.
Yeah, definitely something I observed when moving here from the UK. People don't just go to the pub, they're doing ball dancing, or they're in sports teams or choirs. I think in the Nordics has a very high proportion of choirs. We've still got time for a couple more questions, by the way, for those of you at home or here. So please do use slido.com and then nbforum 2022 so we can try and squeeze a couple in. But Zoe, the theme of this event is future-focused leadership, and I know it's always really hard when we ask guests to just pick one thing, but if you could highlight one really important thing for leaders to focus on in the future, what would you say that should be?
I will just pick the simplest, most human thing, but empathy for other people who are in times of such great uncertainty. Uncertainty is one of the biggest causes of stress. And we're not going to be able to alleviate the uncertainty, but we can offer empathy during those uncertain times.
Yeah, I mean, particularly this winter with the cost of living crisis and people concerned about job security as we potentially move forward into a global recession. How would you say managers should be talking to employees about this turbulence?
We can be asking employees what it is that they need. They need all kinds of things that we can't predict. We can be asking employees how they feel motivated to be helping other people. And in these times of uncertainty, conflict, crisis, we do get motivated, humans get motivated to band together and to help out. And being helpers is one way that we can feel empowered.
Great. And one final quick answer, if you can. We heard a lot about psychological safety yesterday. Do you need to build that first before you can influence others, says this person writing into us?
It's an important question. If you have it, it's helpful. You don't have to build it first, but you can't violate it and still be influential. So you can't have people feeling psychologically unsafe and have them happy to be influenced by you, but you can be influential with people who don't know you yet, who are still open-minded, or it's neutral. Thank you for asking that question.
Yeah, thank you so much. All right, let's give it up for Zoe Chance. Thanks very much for joining us here on the HS Visio stage. All right, that wraps up almost this round of talks from the live studio, but I'm going to be back at 4, and I just want to tell you, do not miss that. We're going to be hearing from Duncan Wardle, the winner of this year's speaker contest, talking about fostering creativity in the workspace, and we have Nobel Prize-winning economist, currently a professor at Columbia University, Joseph Stiglitz, joining us here for that session at 4 o'clock, so do not miss that. And in the meantime, please do share your thoughts on everything that we've been doing here on the HS Visio stage, also on the main stage, what you think of the networking, what you think of the event, what you guys watching at home have taken away from the past couple of days. It is so valuable for us. You can do that on the hashtag nbforum 2022 and in the feedback survey that you'll get towards the end of the day. I'm Maddie Savage. I look forward to seeing you for our final round of speakers at around 4 o'clock. Bye-bye for now. Hello, just gone 4 o'clock in the afternoon here in Helsinki. I'm Maddie Savage. Welcome back to the HS Visio stage at Nordic Business Forum 2022. The main lineup on the main stage has wrapped up, but we still have 2 fantastic interviews for you. While those of you in the arena, lucky enough to be sipping on some bubbles, and hello to those of you at home. I hope that you've got a cup of tea in your hand or whatever you fancy as you wrap up your working days as well. As always, we would love this session to be as interactive as possible, so do get in touch. For those of you here, carry on using the app that you have done, and for those of you watching at home or from the office, it's slido.com and then nbforum 2022. So in just a couple of minutes, we are going to hear from Duncan Wardle, the winner of this year's speaker contest for Nordic Business Forum. Absolutely smashed it on the main stage with loads of energy earlier, and we're going to be talking to him a little bit more about fostering creativity in the workplace. But first of all, we are joined by Nobel Prize-winning economist, currently professor at Columbia University, Joseph Stiglitz. Fantastic to have you here with us. For anyone who didn't catch you on the main stage, what were the key takeaways? How bad are things going to get for us here in Europe?
Well, I emphasized that obviously there's an inflation problem, that the good news is that Europe has finally begun to deal with it, but I argued that they haven't done as much. They should have done it earlier, and that maybe the main message in that area was that Europe is really at war with Russia, but is trying to pretend it's not. It hasn't done what it needs to. No economy goes to war, no country goes to war, pretending that the economy won't be disturbed.
So in terms of what it could have done better, one of the things you talked about was regarding energy back in March, perhaps some kind of agreement, oil and gas. Can things be turned around quickly if there was to be more cooperation at this stage? How much could we mitigate things?
Oh, I think so. I think both the price of electricity could come down from the very high levels, that those who've been very adversely affected, both households and businesses, could be helped by using some taxes, revenues that you get from the windfall profits taxes. And
some countries are looking into that, but it's not a sort of overarching theme everywhere.
That's right. And the point is, they're moving in that direction, but for instance, the windfall profits tax is mostly focused on the fossil fuels, not on the traders, not on so many other areas where there are very large windfall profits.
We've got a few more questions coming in about energy. This person says, moving towards renewables, we'll need substantial investments in the grid network, and that requires time. Won't this scarcity of the grid add to inflation?
Well, everything takes time, but you could do a lot more. As Europe has shown, for instance, in some of the investments that they've done in LNG. So you won't have a perfect solution, but you could have a lot better solution than what's happened, where they really haven't had a wartime mentality in making the investments. So they had started last March and realized there's going to be an energy problem. The debate was, should we cut off buying or should we let Russia cut off selling? But it was so clear there was going to be a reduction. And recognizing that, there should have been a wartime response of doing everything that was possible.
Do you think it would have been different if we hadn't have been coming out of a pandemic where economies were still recovering, where there'd been so much focus on health? Or do you think it is more of a sort of long-term thing that people just weren't ready to accept war?
I think it was they didn't want to admit that this was going to be a war. It was inconceivable that there would be another land war in Europe.
Yeah.
We thought that was the history, that was the past you read about, but you don't go through.
Yeah.
So they didn't really want to, to believe it.
And it's interesting, we were talking here on stage with another speaker earlier about some of the language being used, and even in the media it was a lot of talk about conflict, and then eventually the word war started to be used more as people really got to grips with the severity.
So one thing they could have done, for instance, during the pandemic, as I mentioned in the discussion, we in the United States invoked the Defense Production Act. So even though we weren't at war, but we were at war with the virus.
Yeah.
We said that the government could order where resources went, what was going to be produced. We could tell a factory, you're going to produce protective gear or something. We recognized that it was a war. And we said, we're not going to rely just on the market. We're going to use the market, but we're not going to rely just on the market. It's so clear to me that that's what they should have done back in March. And they still haven't done that.
We're getting some more questions about cooperation. This one from Joseph says, what countries should the West work more closely with economically in the future? I guess if the distance from Russia continues.
Well, I think that it's clear that the world is becoming more divided. Obviously, Russia is on the other side of the divide. There's some debate about whether, if Putin were to leave, what would that imply? Should there be more of a rapprochement? But the likelihood is that that's going to be a long-term division. And the United States is making a very strong rhetorical break with China. It actually hasn't really broken off, except in areas of technology. But we passed this bill, $250 billion of technology bill that goes so much against European views about state aid and industrial policy, and how Europe was going to respond is not clear. But we're going ahead and saying we have a new Cold War, and we have to begin investing so that we are prepared.
How do you think that affects things if the US is taking such a different approach to Europe?
Well, I think it's very clear it's going to have a very big impact on Europe, because we live in an integrated world. If the United States says we won't allow Huawei or other technology be involved in anything that we engage in, Europe can't buy that product. And that's what it learned in that particular case.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to be broader in most areas of high technology.
Yeah, really interesting to see how those frictions
and one
evolve.
of the things I pointed out in my talk is whether you think the U.S. is right about this or not is really almost irrelevant.
It's such a big player, yeah.
That the reality is this is a bipartisan view, a dominant view, that is now really part of, you might say, part of the American reality, and therefore Europe is going to have to adapt to this.
Thank you, Joseph, and thank you for all the questions coming in. Turning something completely different, but really interesting. This person wants to know, what are your thoughts on a 4-day work week, and how could that potentially shape our economies of the future?
Well, actually, I think a 4-day work week is not a bad idea. People used to work a 60-hour week, and then it got reduced to 40 hours. Productivity increased a lot. And one has to remember the purpose of an economy is to serve society, not the other way around. And if people want to enjoy more leisure, we should structure our society to allow that. And we're rich enough that we can do that. we don't necessarily need more material goods. What's really scarce is time and what you do with your time. So getting a
Would
better...
you be on board with universal basic income, something that's been tested here? We've debated it a little bit on stage today.
I'm not in favor of universal basic income right now for a couple of reasons. First of all, I think work is an important part of life. Maybe it's more important in my life than it is in others, and I know younger people often don't feel the same way, but I do think work is part of what gives meaning to life. Secondly, right now, our society actually needs a lot to be done. There's this big challenge of the green transition that I talked a lot about. A lot of people say, can we afford it? My view is we can't afford not to do it. But when we say we can't afford it, what do we mean? We don't have resources. Well, if we have labor and we have capital, we have the resources. So rather than people enjoying leisure, I think they should be devoting their efforts to helping the green transition.
What about education? We've had a few questions coming in about how economics should potentially be taught differently in future, particularly acknowledging that we're living on a finite planet with finite resources.
Well, I think two major changes in education is first, because of the internet, and so much information is available to everybody, more than was ever available 40 years ago, to anybody, even. The real issue is enabling people to have lifelong learning, to discriminate between good information and disinformation and misinformation. So, in a sense, we have to, our education system really has to function as teaching people the ability to learn and adapt. But the good news at the same time is that we can do a lot of learning outside of the classroom.
Yeah.
And not only, both at work, but over the internet. And online courses are getting better and better at communicating, teaching ideas. So the need for constant learning is clear, and the market, we've responded, and our new technologies have helped both the demand and supply side.
Yeah, and in some ways, that is one of the very small silver linings of the pandemic, that digitalization was so rapid, giving more online learning opportunities and the chance to grow that more quickly. We've talked a bit about the environment. You mentioned that on the main stage and then here. How do you see travel fitting into this? Obviously, business travel, we know the value of conferences like this, but we're also contributing to the problem if we're using fossil fuel-powered transport to get to these kind of events. So where do you sit on that debate?
Well, I think that one needs to focus on the big picture. And the big picture are the big things like fossil fuels being used in energy generation, in transportation, in energy inefficiency, in buildings and housing. So, obviously, we need to be sensitive in travel. I think what Europe has done in strengthening railroads is really an important step in the right direction. And I only wish the United States would do what you're doing in Europe in terms of railroads. But and increasingly there are ways of travel that have a lower carbon footprint. But just think about it. If you go to a meeting and you learn how to be better at conserving energy and being greener, the amount that you the reduction in the carbon footprint can be many times larger than the carbon footprint of the travel.
Yeah.
So we ought to, one of the things in the meetings is ought to increase our resolve and say, net, did we improve things?
Really interesting. And once again, going back to the value of learning and the value of being in spaces where you can learn new things. Thanks so much. Let's give a huge round of applause to our guest, Joseph Stiglitz. Thank you. All right, while Joseph gets comfortable and heads off the stage, I'm going to tell you a little bit more about the winner of this year's speaker contest, who's headed this way to join me on the HS Visio stage. He picked up Nordic Business Forum's competition to find new speaker talent. It takes place every year. This year, there were more than 300 applications from almost 40 countries. And yeah, Daniel Wardle picked it up. He was on stage earlier with his talk, Embedding a Culture of Innovation to Everyone's DNA. I can see him. He's putting up some of the work, I think, that he did on stage, and potentially something new as well. So hopefully we'll find out what's going on there in just a moment. As Pep was saying on the stage, this is a competition that takes place every year. So if you've been inspired by this year's speakers or thought maybe you could do even better, then do keep an eye out for more information on the entry that's going on there. Now, Duncan, you've got your headset on, so do you want to tell us all what you're doing over there, beavering away? And some people on the live stream might not be able to see that view, so tell us what's going on.
I'm a great believer in doing, not listening. Nobody listens. Nobody learns by listening. You learn by doing. Who here has ever been to a brainstorm where nothing ever happened as a result of the brainstorm? Who here knows they're going to be invited to another one this year, already knowing that nothing's going to happen as a result of the brainstorm? Well, perhaps we should stop doing it the way we're doing it now. So I need a volunteer. We're going to brainstorm an idea for a party. Then you're all going to get to have a go. Then we're going to do it a different way, one which I believe can change a culture overnight if you choose to get there. But I need a volunteer. We're going to brainstorm an idea for a party. You get to pick the theme. It could be Star Wars, Harry Potter, whatever you like. Who wants to play? Give this lady a round of applause, people.
Woo!
Hello, what's your name? Nice to meet you. Are you a Star Wars fan, a Harry Potter fan, or something completely different fan?
I'm a fan of a lot of things.
A party, a theme, anything.
I'm going to have a Halloween party.
Halloween party. I'm going to come at you with some ideas for Halloween party. I'd like you to start your response with the words that we hear every day at work. No, because. They'll be the first two words you use, okay? And you'll be telling me why we shouldn't be doing that particular idea, okay?
Sorry, can you say again?
Every single response, you're going to start the words with no, because. They'll be the first two words you use.
No, because.
Okay? All right, so I was thinking we could come, actually, these people could come in first because they're dressed in orange, and we'll get everybody else dressed in orange as well. No, because.
No, because we wear blue every day.
Well, what if we did a pumpkin carving competition? Everybody gets their own pumpkin, and the winner gets to go to Universal Studios to Halloween Horror Nights.
No, because pumpkin carving is messy.
Yeah, no. Oh, I tell you what, we could get everybody on a broomstick, and we could all go flying around looking like idiots.
No, because we don't have enough broomsticks.
Okay, what if we did a pumpkin spice latte?
No, because that's too poser and trendy.
Okay, give this lady a round of applause.
Woo!
Thank you very much. Now, in the spirit of, oh no, do I have to? Oh yes, you do. You're going to stand up because I need the energy. Come on, stand up. Stand up. If you're seated, you're in. So, with your partner, I want one of you to pitch the idea for tonight's party. I want the second person to always respond with the words, no, because. Off you go.
All right.
Are you up for a spot of volunteering?
Sure.
The next one we're going to do is exactly the same, except you'll respond with the words yes and will be the first two words you use, and you'll just give me back what I've given you.
All right.
All right, let me have you back. Now, for those people who were throwing out the idea, how was that exercise? How was it? Easy to kill ideas, right? Right. If you were honest, you'd say it sucked, it was frustrating, he kept shooting my ideas down, or if you were really honest, you'd say it was business as usual. So, by the way, was your idea getting bigger or smaller? Which way? Bigger. Bigger? Okay, that's good. I want to show you a different way of doing it, which, when used at the right time, can change a culture overnight. Maddie has been voluntold, but she's also volunteered. Give her a round of applause, people.
Thanks. This is completely off the cuff, by the way.
So,
had no idea this was going to happen.
Theme for a party, Star Wars or Harry Potter?
Harry Potter, please.
Right, I'm going to come at you with an idea for a Harry Potter party. Unlike our colleague earlier on who started with no because, I'd like you to start with the words yes and they'll be the first words you use each time, and we'll build on an idea together. So I was thinking of coming over to your house, put a sorting hat inside the front door, and all the good people at this conference get Gryffindor, and all the bad people get to go to Slytherin.
Yes, and we'll give them free butterbeer, alcoholic and non-alcoholic.
Yes, and we can have a magic potions room where we make amazing cocktails that turn us into something totally freaky.
Yes, and we'll all have different coloured hair once we've eaten the potions and drunk the potions.
Yes, and you could be Professor McGonagall, and I could be Dumbledore.
Yes, and then we'll go wearing our capes and our multicoloured hair, and we'll run all the way around the neighbourhood.
Give this lady a round of applause. This time, the second person is pitching the idea. You have to stand, I need the energy. Second person gets to pick the theme for the party, after which you both respond with? Yes and. Off you go.
Thank you. No worries. It's fine. I'm not sure. You off.
All right, let me have you back. How was that exercise? Fun. Fun is always the first word you hear. Why shouldn't work be fun? This time around, bigger or smaller? Bigger. You can always take a big idea and value engineer it down. You can't take a small crap idea and turn it into a big one. Far more importantly, you work inside a big organization, a small organization. You have local constituents, local government, regulations, and people to bring on board with your idea. When you'd finished building that idea together, whose idea was it by the time you'd finished? Ours. Two very simple words from the world of improv that have a power of turning my idea into our idea and accelerating its opportunity to get done. Don't let if you take nothing away from the last 2 days, don't let the words no because be the first 2 words out of your mouth when somebody comes at you with a new idea. Just remind yourself, we're not green-lighting this idea for execution today, we are merely greenhousing it together. Use yes and. Now, close your eyes. We're going to play a word association game. I'm going to throw out a question. You're going to throw out the first word that comes into your mind, providing it's something you can shout out in public. Where are you usually, and what are you doing when you get your best ideas? Shower, running, jogging, playing, falling asleep in a park, driving,
Cycling.
cycling, skiing, sauna. Okay, how many people said to themselves the following 2 words? At work. Hands up. Anybody? Any one person? I could have done that in there with 6,500 people, and not one person would have put their hands up. Why? Because, actually, close your eyes again. Picture that last verbal argument you were in with somebody, bit of a screaming match, you're angry at each other, close your eyes. Just think about that last argument you had with somebody. Okay, now the argument's over, you can open your eyes. You turn to walk away from the argument. You're very frustrated, I'm never going to work with that person again. You're 30 seconds away, 60 seconds away from that argument. What just popped into your head, just as you turn to walk away from that argument? Totally spontaneously, what popped into your head? So the thing you wish you'd said, the killer one line, or the perfect line. Oh yeah, if I'd have said that, I'd have had him, the perfect line. Did you ever deliver the perfect line during the argument? No. always comes to you just as you walk away. Why? In an argument, your brain is very, very, very busy defending yourself. Guess what your brain looks like in the office? Emails, presentations, deadlines, PowerPoints, and I hear myself say, I don't have time to think. The number one barrier to innovation. When you don't have time to think, the door between your conscious and subconscious brain is firmly closed, slammed shut. Google this. What percentage of my brain is conscious? 13% of your brain is conscious, 87% of your brain is subconscious. Every bicycle ride you've ever been on, any innovation you've ever seen, every creative problem you've ever solved is back there as unrelated stimulus to help you solve that challenge. But when that door is slammed shut, you don't have access to it. So why am I playful? I'm deliberately playful. I asked you to do an energizer at the beginning of today, to be a sex therapist for a honeybee, or a designer of parachutes for elephants. What was I doing? I was listening for laughter. The moment I hear laughter, I know that metaphorically I've placed you back on your bicycle or back in the shower where you are when you have your best ideas. That is known as amazing alpha. And if you as leaders are not playful at the right time, you cannot expect your team to follow, and none of them will have their best ideas at work. That is the importance of playfulness at the right time. Right, I'm going to shut up now, and we're going to do the Q&A portion.
We're going to have a go.
And we've got 3 minutes.
You're quite a hard act to follow. That was amazing. Let's give him a huge round of applause for just that last burst of energy that I think a lot of us needed. But, I mean, we should just say congratulations because, you know, this time last year, you were not on the agenda of announced speakers. You've won this competition. Tell us about the process and how it feels to be where you are now.
The process was I broke every single rule they asked me to keep to, and I won!
Tell us what you broke.
I was told, don't draw. People won't like it if you draw Nordic Disney characters. Don't ask Finnish people to participate. They won't.
They did.
Yeah. Oh, and don't go over time. And I always go over time.
But that's awesome. And it's been really great to hear all of your thoughts. What I will say, I don't want to push this anywhere in a pessimistic note, but we have talked a lot about a potential economic crash. It's understandable that there'll be managers thinking, yeah, that was really creative, but now's the time to play it safe. Now's not the time to make major shifts. What are you going to say to them? What are your last nuggets of wisdom of why all this is worth it?
You're going out of business in less than 10 years. It's a post-pandemic world. The biggest challenge facing all of you in the next decade is Generation Z does not want to work for you, and you already know it. You're driven by quarterly results. They're driven by purpose. How's that going to work out? It's not. And so iteration, keep iterating. You'll meet your quarterly results. I was asked to give a talk to Stanley Black & Decker about purpose. I know nothing about tools. I know nothing about Generation Z, or I didn't at the time. So I went to watch this generation purchasing tools. And I went back to Stanley Black & Decker and I said, this generation has never heard of your brand. They didn't talk about your price point or your products. They talked about what was important to them. We're going to build our dream bathroom, our dream kitchen, our dream apartment. I said, your purpose, if you choose to create one, is you could be the brand who helps people build their dreams. And you can see the finance guys rolling their eyes thinking he's nuts. Okay, great. If you're the brand who can help people build their dreams, could you be in construction? Yes. Hospitality, sports, education, building, banking, finances. You could be in any industry you want. No, we make tools. We're really good at it. We're the world's largest tool manufacturer. And there's a growing middle class in India and Mexico. They will buy our tools. No, they won't. Welcome to the world of 3D printing. We're building houses in Houston, Texas today for the price of an iPhone in less than 5 days. I'm working with Pepsi on you printing your own Doritos in your own living room 10 years from today. If I can print Amazon, do you think they want drone delivery to your house? No, they do not. They expect that 35% of the things you purchase online by the year 2035, you will print in your living room. If I can print anything I want on demand 10 to 15 years from today, what will I use a hammer, a chisel, or a saw for? Oh no, they'll make their quarterly results for the next 5 years. They'll iterate. Stanley Black & Decker will not exist by the year 2030 because they are driven by quarterly results, not purpose.
And finally, one last question. The first thing a team leader should do to spark creativity?
Playfulness.
Playfulness. Brilliant. All right, thank you so much for that last question. Let's give it up for Duncan Wardle, fantastic last guest here on the main stage. And that is almost the end of our live broadcasting from this year's Nordic Business Forum. Thank you so much to all of you who've joined us here on the HS Visio stage. It's been brilliant to have so much audience involvement this year. I do think it's come back in full force since the pandemic, and actually everyone here has been more engaged than ever. So thank you so much. My name's Maddie Savage. Hope to see you again next time. Bye-bye.
Take the pictures home, because I'm not.
Yeah, someone put them in your office. Awesome. Thank you so much. That was great.